Okay, so once again, just like last week, this video is going to focus on day 3 for the FTC versus Microsoft Activision Blizzard case. This is really such an expansive and just complex topic with so much to go over. And because I know most people can't listen to the trial themselves, I want to give everybody the highlights and just kind of get everybody caught up. It's just that there's so much to go over here. But as always, I'll try to keep things as tight and concise as possible. I will respect your time. What I will say here, though, is that today was another very strong showing for Microsoft, and I'm going to explain all of the reasons as to why. Now, there's really 3 major things that took place today. PlayStation boss Jim Ryan, he was pressed in a video. Then the FTC, they brought their star witness, or one of their star witnesses being their expert economist. And then Judge Corley, she was once again the star of this show. For somebody that's not a gamer, she is brilliantly putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and she directly countered the FTC on several of their claims. Now, we'll get into all of that in a little bit, but first, let's go and talk about Jim Ryan. Last week when we talked about this, I said that Phil Spencer was highly impressive. His testimony was so strong that he very well might have won Activision for Microsoft. And that's something that I stand by because he did a phenomenal job to put things short. But for as good as the Xbox did, Sony's Jim Ryan, well, things did not go as well for him and Sony here today. Instead, if there was much of a case left for the FTC at all, he somehow single-handedly tore down a lot of what the FTC was building up here. One of the FTC's big arguments has been about exclusivity. Microsoft has acquired studios in the past to make their games exclusive, such as Bethesda as an example. And the FTC has really tried to paint them as a villain for doing something like this. So this is something that they once again tried to hammer home today, that exclusives are important to platform holders, which honestly, I think is pretty evident. We all know this. We can all agree with that. That, however, does not mean that Call of Duty will be exclusive, as has been pointed out time and time again. And Jim Ryan, well, from how he was wording things today, he didn't seem to be all that concerned about exclusivity when it comes to the Activision Blizzard acquisition. Instead, though, what his testimony really kind of told us is that his true fear lies within Xbox Game Pass. While being asked about Bethesda exclusivity, he said that he doesn't like that Starfield and Redfall are exclusive to Xbox, but he doesn't view them as anti-competitive. He thinks those are okay, so he must be somewhat aware that, yeah, they make a lot of exclusives themselves, so it would be kind of hypocritical to say that. But what he said he's concerned about is that Xbox will use Activision and Call of Duty to drive PlayStation consumers to Xbox Game Pass. He claims that this would be bad for PlayStation fans, but I want to ask you all this. How is this bad for consumers? He claims that this would be bad for PlayStation fans, but is it really? Or is it just bad for Sony's business model because they don't want another option that competes with their $70 games? Because, you know, it kind of seems like that might be what he's alluding to here, and this is something that Judge Corley is starting to catch on to as well. Remember earlier I said that she is starting to piece together the puzzle, and as part of their next witness's statements, she actually suggested that Xbox Game Pass is debatably good for customers as it is an extra choice. So, I mean, okay, you can kind of take that as you will, but Jim Ryan, he seems more afraid of Xbox Game Pass than Call of Duty exclusivity. Now, absolutely nobody should be surprised by this at all. I've been saying this pretty much since day one. The foreclosure argument that Jim Ryan and the FTC came up with is just an elaborate excuse to block the acquisition. It's nothing more than that, and it never has been. And his testimony today further confirmed that. I mean, if he was so worried about foreclosure, why not go ahead and sign that contract that Microsoft already offered him? He still cannot give a reason for that. But one of the more amusing back and forths from Jim Ryan today was when he was asked about if he would make Activision content exclusive if he acquired them. And his response was, quote unquote, "That's a hypothetical question I prefer not to answer." He was then told you don't get to not answer. And then ultimately, he still didn't give them an answer. I think we all kind of know why here, but again, we'll just kind of ignore that for this specific topic today. That was how a lot of his testimony was, though. He apparently just conveniently didn't know a lot of things. He seemingly had selective amnesia or something. He just would not answer what he felt like not answering. Very evasive. which that was kind of a theme for the FTC today. Now, another big focal point to this acquisition has been the nascent cloud market and the possibility that Microsoft may or may not have a monopoly in this market if this acquisition were to go through. The possibility that they could make Activision content exclusive to their cloud-based service. Well, old Jimbo was asked about this as well because Sony's had, they've had game streaming for an even longer period of time than Xbox. They've had PlayStation Now up and running since 2014, so they were asked about this, and he did not like this question at all. He flat out refused to acknowledge that they've had cloud streaming since 2014. He kept pointing to PlayStation Plus Premium, which essentially absorbed the PlayStation Now service and its cloud streaming content. So he was adamant that they've only been in the cloud streaming market for a few years because of that, which is factually and historically wrong. I don't even understand why he needs to lie about something like this, because it kind of destroys his credibility in court. But, I mean, he stuck by this statement to really the very end. Interestingly enough, though, he did admit that nobody, his words, nobody can predict the growth and success for cloud gaming. Now, that might not necessarily be as devastating to the FTC's case because they do have other arguments to center on. I mean, it doesn't really help them either, but this does hurt the CMA quite significantly, which has built their entire case around cloud gaming. So more so, both Jim Ryan and now Google, these are some of their key witnesses for cloud gaming, and they've now both gone on the record to say they don't believe cloud gaming is a separate market than consoles. I mean, we all knew this already. I don't think that there's really some big surprise here, but it is kind of hilarious that both of their key witnesses absolutely dismantled their very own case. The last big argument for the FTC, though, is defining the game market. They want to define Xbox and PlayStation as their own market, quote-unquote, the high-end console market. Now, the reason for this is because this would basically exclude the 10-year contract that Microsoft signed with Nintendo. That's not good for the FTC's case because Call of Duty would be available to even more gamers post-acquisition. That's very pro-consumer. But somehow, Jim Ryan and Sony, they managed to contradict this talking point as well. Jim was asked about Nintendo as a competitor, and while he admitted that the Switch was a console, of course it is, he would not acknowledge it as a direct competitor to the PlayStation 5. The problem here, though, is that this was contradicted just a little bit later on, because when Sony acquired Bungie, they apparently told regulators that both Xbox and Nintendo, yes, Nintendo, are competitors. This is coming directly from Sony to regulators. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. Once again, Jim Ryan was caught lying, and Microsoft brilliantly showed the judge this after his testimony. Now, Jim Ryan also mentioned things like how Bungie to them is worth more than the Activision Blizzard acquisition. This is coming from the same guy that previously told regulators that Call of Duty has no competition. But yet here, according to Jim Ryan's statement, they've acquired a studio that he believes is even better, that makes similar games to Call of Duty. Yeah, he's talking out both sides of his mouth, and that became even more clear as the day unfolded. And that really takes us into the next testimony. Dr. Lee. Okay, this guy, yeah, he was something else. This is the FTC's expert economist. His job was to analyze the market and see if there would be any major anti-competitive results from a possible Call of Duty foreclosure. However, he had a very, very hard time explaining how he actually came up with his results. Microsoft's lawyers dissected the different models that he came up with, and with every single question that he was asked, he would just run circles around that question. He refused to kind of give a straight answer to absolutely everything. Nothing was ever clear with Dr. Lee. He was very evasive, and even while being asked if it was likely that Xbox would foreclose Call of Duty, he refused to give a yes or no answer. He just kept saying that it was more likely that Call of Duty would remain multi-platform without an acquisition, which, no duh, that's not some big surprise. You don't need to pay anybody to come up with that type of answer. But that's not really the question. The question is not, is it more likely? The question is, do you think Xbox will foreclose Call of Duty despite all the evidence that says otherwise? And he just could not give a clear answer to this question. And that's not good for the FTC. See, the FTC has the burden of proof to show why this acquisition needs to be blocked. So they need clear and definitive evidence to show this. And Dr. Lee, being one of their key star witnesses, the economist that they're basing all of their future predictions on, had none of that here. At one point, the economist even admitted that Call of Duty is not essential for consoles. And that's just another argument for the FTC that just completely shattered here. It's just one point after another for them. I don't even really know what they have to argue about by this point. Even in the models that he described, it was discovered that his 20% conversion rate, if Call of Duty was foreclosed to Xbox, was his own input. Conveniently, and this is interesting, if he went with a 15% conversion rate, then Call of Duty being exclusive to Xbox wouldn't be profitable, which would destroy the FTC's case. So after hours upon hours of back and forth over the different models that he used, Judge Corley, she started to show her frustration. She cut him off and abruptly said that we're going to lunch. She seemed absolutely annoyed by his non-answers. Now, when they returned from lunch, she did appear to be in a better mood, but this was really the point where she started to assert herself into the conversations. She started asking questions like she did last week, and all of which were terrible for the FTC. I mean, you can just kind of tell that Judge Corley is very attentive, and I mean, she understands what's happening here. She is starting to piece the puzzle together. So, I mean, just going back to the market definition that the FTC is trying to sell, Judge Corley, she seemed to push back here. She brought up the question, why is it that you don't want to include PC in your market definition? In which he explained, they're more expensive, which means it's unlikely that console players would leave their platform to buy a PC. Well, she didn't seem to agree with that response, and she pointed out that not only does PC have more to offer being a multimedia machine, you can do more than just simply play games, so the price can be justified for some players for that reason alone. But also, more importantly, the Nintendo Switch and the Xbox Series S is comparable in price, but interestingly enough, the FTC, they also don't want to include them either. So she kind of asked them about that, and with that, the price point argument, it just kind of fell apart, and so did their argument with Xbox Game Pass. See, the FTC keeps harping on the idea that Call of Duty will be in Xbox Game Pass, which could possibly hurt Sony, but Judge Corley also pushed back on that by asking if Sony even has the same business plans for their own subscription services. She referred to Jim Ryan's testimony where he suggested that they've never asked Activision for subscription content because they knew that they would refuse. So Judge Corley suggested that by having Activision content in Xbox Game Pass, that is actually debatably good for consumers as it's an extra option. And right there, bingo, there it is. This is something that we've been talking about for well over a year. This case has kind of devolved into this absurdity because the FTC has made it about protecting the market leader, PlayStation. But the judge here is saying, hold up for a moment, what about the consumers? There's a very real debate that this extra option of Xbox Game Pass and all of these different cloud-based services is better for consumers, and that's who we're trying to protect. So she's asking, are we considering that at all? And that's a good question for the FTC. Does the consumers actually matter here at all? It doesn't really seem like it, but and this was the final nail in the coffin for the FTC today. For all the Xbox Game Pass and cloud-based arguments that they've made, Judge Corley responded to all that perfectly. She simply said, cloud and subscription services seem to be just a different way of paying for games. So why are we saying it's a different market? And there you go. The FTC simply can't explain it. It's been evident to most gamers that this acquisition only gives gamers more choice. But the ultimate takeaway for today was that it's pretty clear that the judge also now sees it as well. She seems to see straight through what the FTC is trying to do here. This acquisition, it's not anti-competitive. Call of Duty will be multi-platform, and all evidence points to that fact. In fact, she already got her answers for that last week pretty definitively. Any further argument on that topic is useless, unless the FTC has something huge up to their sleeves, which right now, it absolutely seems like they do not. And it's also not anti-consumer because it's going to give gamers more options, as the judge herself pointed out. she completely understands. She even referred to Jim Ryan's testimony to kind of show this. So, I mean, after today, I really just don't see how the FTC can come back from this. I think a lot of us already knew that they didn't have a great case, but they are publicly embarrassing themselves in front of one of the most passionate communities in the entire world. So their blunders here are on full display for the entire internet to see. And one of the funniest things is that somehow Microsoft even got evidence for their CMA case as well today. I imagine the CMA is probably paying close attention to what's happening here, and yeah, it's not going well for them either, I'd have to say. They will be in a tight spot if the FTC loses, which right now, it's not looking good for the FTC, and I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. There you go, though. I think I'm going to go ahead and call this a video here. Hopefully, these videos are helpful, just kind of summarizing some of the highlights of the day. Again, I know a lot of people can't listen into the live hearing themselves, and while it's a lot of information, it is a lot of information to kind of encapsulate into a short and concise video like this. For those that can't listen, I do hope that these videos are useful. As always, though, do stay tuned for more. More is to come as Satya Nadella and Bobby Kotick are still set to take the stand tomorrow. So do make sure to hit that subscribe button. With that, until next time, peace out.